All right, hi guys. Okay, so this video is gonna go along with our winter ecology notes. So just as a reminder, under classwork, if you go to Google Classroom, here under classwork, under our winter ecology resources should be your winter ecology notes packet. And if we open it up, I can't quite remember the first lecture, I think got you I think just through here. So let's see, we're gonna start. Let's go ahead, make sure that you're filling in your notes packet. You will get points for them as you go along. This should already be completed, but just as a little review. So remember, we're kind of focusing on during winter, animals have three major options. They can either migrate, so they can leave to find a more suitable environment to overwinter, and then come back for the breeding season, which we kind of already talked about. And so today we're going to kind of look at examples of hibernation and torpor, and then some that just stay, they resist, and they tolerate the winter here in Ohio. So we've already done all this with migration. So let's talk about hibernation and then this word called torpor, which some of you may have heard about. So hibernation is dormancy for long periods. Generally, these organisms sleep all winter, although they definitely may kind of wake up, move around a little bit, and then go back to sleep. The animal's bodily functions slow down in order to conserve energy through a season with no food or water. So we think of true hibernators as organisms that truly, even if they kind of wake up and rustle around, they typically don't depend on eating at all throughout the winter. A lot of them don't even go to the bathroom over the winter or drink water. Oh, you can see the picture here is one good example of a true hibernator are bats. So a lot of bat species hibernate over the winter. The old ground squirrel. So this little ground squirrel here, this little guy is a great example of a true hibernator. And we call these true hibernators because I feel like ever since elementary school, everyone learns like, oh yeah, bears hibernate. But a lot of and we'll talk about this in a few minutes, but a lot of scientists actually don't even consider bears to be true hibernators. But this little ground squirrel is. So this is a Colombian ground squirrel. There's a number of different species of ground squirrels. And these guys are fascinating because they stay where they don't live here in Ohio. Here in the United States, they're mostly out west. So what these guys do, they stay wherever they live, they stay there all winter. Their body temperature drops from its usual 90 degrees Fahrenheit down to 39 degrees, right? So their body temperatures are able to drop drastically. The reduced temperatures slow other processes, so their pulse and their respiration drops significantly. We see with these guys, we think that they're breathing. They may take a breath every 4 to 6 minutes. So their bodies just slow way down. They'll usually curl into a ball to conserve heat. And they usually kind of burrow down into the ground. So they have like underground burrows where they'll overwinter. And they slow way down. So they obviously need like way less energy, but they also survive off of body fat, which is usually enough for them. So they usually pack on body fat in the fall. They're triggered by changes mostly in daylight and temperature to eat and eat and eat and eat and eat, and then pack on some fat, and that's kind of how they survive through the winter. Here, I'm going to just watch a portion of this little video. It's just kind of cute. I like to show you guys, I don't think I ever was like introduced to the world of field scientists, and I think it's just fascinating. So this is a very short little clip about the scientists that study these little ground squirrels. If you had me for biology, we actually do a little like a 3-day unit on some of their research and their data. Ground squirrels are fascinating to scientists because we're actually trying to figure out like how their bodies do this, if they can withstand such dropping temperatures, you know, what can we learn from that? So we're actually kind of trying to tie this research into specific fields within the medical industry. Okay, but here we go, sorry. How to catch
The first step is finding a burrow for a squirrel. The second step is setting the trap. And then the third step is adding carrots to that trap. The fourth step is going away from the trap and setting more traps. The fifth step is coming back, checking the traps, see if there's anybody there. And if there is, the sixth step is deciding if you're going to let that squirrel go or if you're going to take it back to the lab with you.
To catch Arctic ground squirrels, we use live tomahawk traps, and they're really simple to use. We bait them with carrot, and the squirrels essentially enter through the entrance. There's a little treadle that they step on, and it closes shut behind them. And so we're able to capture them quite easily. We don't see a lot of trap avoidance with the ground squirrels. We do have some squirrels that become trap happy, so they understand that there's food in traps, and so they seem to actively seek them out, and you catch them more often than you would expect.
I think it's also important to be able to put your research out there and get involvement from the public and other people such that they can learn and teach others as well about the research. So we've been committed on this project, and NSF is committed to supporting us on this project, to bringing in Polar Trek teachers from the lower 48 where they're working in public schools to Alaska.
Okay, I'm going to stop there. The rest of that video, I mean, it's really short to begin with, but it's just talking about how they kind of pulled classroom teachers and got them out to help with the research. But anyways, you kind of saw how these little ground squirrels are real characters. They're tricky to research, as you saw, because they get trap happy. And so they will come back to the traps like over and over again. So then the scientists are just getting the same old ground squirrel over and over again. And there's some pretty funny little videos out there about these guys. But anyway, so that's an example of a true hibernator. And then I talked about this word called torpor. So torpor is just dormancy for much shorter periods of time. Torpor is usually used as an energy saving measure during a time of extremely cold weather. So animals that go through torpor, it's like intermittent hibernation. So think of these organisms, they may, you know, like in Ohio, winter is probably a good example of, we probably have a lot of animals that actually just undergo torpor, meaning they become dormant for a period of time. And then heck, we have a couple days of like 50s in the winter, you know, and with the warmer temperatures, they may wake up, they may get up, walk around, they may eat, they may drink, they may poop during the, you know, the time of being awake and aroused. And then as temperatures drop, they may go back into hibernation. So it's honestly pretty common that a lot of animals around here would actually probably undergo torpor versus like true hibernation. So examples of torpor are like skunks, chipmunks, gray squirrels, and bears. Like I said, despite what your elementary school teachers told you, we now think that bears really just undergo torpor. So bears do some really cool things though. So what we see with bears is that they actually don't have a huge reduction in their body temperature like other true hibernators do, like we saw with the ground squirrel. So in order to kind of retain heat and keep their body temperature up, in the fall season, they'll start to develop a really thick coat, which is probably similar to a lot of our dogs. They have a less surface area, if you kind of think of it that way, to mass ratio than smaller hibernators. So it allows them to actually stay warmer. Their metabolism does drop in half because they do become way less active. So their metabolism drops in half. This is my favorite, I think. So their digestive system tightens into a knot, like physically changes forms. And the little waste that gets processed, so remember their metabolism is slowed, so they're creating very little waste. But the waste that is created actually gets processed into the bloodstream and forms protein, usable proteins for their body. They can go, a number of months without eating, drinking, pooping, or peeing. But again, it wouldn't be uncommon for these guys to kind of wake up on a few warm days, actually get out, eat, drink, poop, things like that. Here's another cute little video about bears.
Bears prepare.
I know the quality is terrible, but I just couldn't find another video that had exactly what I wanted. So here we go.
Prepare their dens well in advance of when they are needed.
I'll start it over.
Bears prepare their dens well in advance of when they are needed. A bear rarely uses the same den 2 years in a row. Bears may spend the winter in hollow trees, in holes scooped out of the ground, or in earthen caves. The most important feature of a good den is that it holds the heat well, so most dens are small, and bears line them with bark, moss, and hay for additional comfort. In the Rockies, winter often has a stronghold on the landscape by late October. With the first snow, food becomes even scarcer. What's still growing is soon buried in ice and will be hard to reach for 6 months or more. Before the land is locked in for the winter, even this big old grizzly will seek his den. While the rest of the world suffers through this brutal season, the hibernating bear becomes an efficient, totally self-contained unit of life. The exact combination of visual, chemical, and environmental signals that stimulate each bear to enter its den is still unknown. Perhaps the shorter days or the falling of the first snow triggers a hormonal response. Maybe the fat cells themselves induce hibernation. When the time comes, the bears simply crawl into their dens and go to sleep. Once inside the den, the bear curls into a ball. Within days, all the bear's body functions begin to change. The flow of blood is concentrated in its heart, its lungs, and its brain. The heart rate drops to 10 beats a minute. Respiration slows. Protected by its heavy winter coat and a 4-inch thick layer of fat, the bear's body temperature remains a near normal 96 degrees Fahrenheit. In the digestive system, changes are radical. A hibernating bear consumes no food and passes no waste, so its stomach and its intestines cease to function and remain empty throughout the long winter sleep. But the substance of living cells must be constantly replenished. The bear needs water and protein and 4,000 calories every day. How it gets what it needs is one of nature's most remarkable achievements. Like a self-contained recycling furnace, the bear obtains everything from within its own body, using intricate metabolic pathways that do not exist in other animals. From its fat, it extracts all the calories and water needed to run its body systems. From its muscle and other lean tissue, it obtains all the protein needed to thrive. One waste product that results is nitrogen urea. For all other animals, urea can become life-threatening. It quickly builds up to toxic levels, causing death in a matter of days. But the hibernating bear is uniquely equipped to benefit from the potentially deadly wastes in its body. In its kidneys and liver, it reprocesses the urea and manufactures amino acids. No other animal can do this. The amino acids recombine to make complex proteins. These new proteins recycle through its body and replace muscle and other tissue that was used for food. The bear meets all its food and water needs, keeps up muscle strength, and produces no waste.
All right, so I just think those bears are pretty cool. Okay. And then, of course, they can stay and resist. And what we mean by tolerate is, like, remain fairly active. So they're staying and they're enduring many of the challenges of winter. These organisms must battle, obviously, like cold temperatures and very limited food sources. So usually in class, I would ask you to think about what animals could we see now in the middle of winter in Ohio. So some of the common examples are deer, rabbits, chipmunks, squirrels. Some birds definitely stay. Fox remain pretty active. A lot of the owls stay and overwinter here. So those that stay have a lot of different types of adaptation in order to help them stay and survive. So prior to winter weather, animals have psychological responses that are cued in by the reduced daylight hours. So this occurs actually, it triggers hormones in the brain in order to get them to start to prepare for winter. So this is caused by hormones secreted then throughout the entire body. In animals like moose, elk, and deer, it actually triggers what we call their rut. So if any of you are hunters, you're familiar with the rut season because it coincides oftentimes with rut and hunting season, which is perfectly timed so that their young is then born in the spring when food is plentiful. Trigger some animals to eat more in order to build up layers of fat. And so we heard that with the bear and we heard that with the ground squirrel, and definitely animals that try to stay active, they'll put on extra layers of fat as well. Some animals begin to cache, is what we call storing extra food. And if you guys go on a hike, if you just now look around, you will find these little food caches. And it's really just a food stash. So you'll see them. Here's a picture of some pine cones stashed under a log. You can see food caches literally anywhere in the forest, way up in the trees, in the crooks of, like a trunk and a branch, on the ground. A lot of times, if you watch a squirrel, a lot of times they're either caching a nut, like they literally have a nut, they dig a little hole. I mean, from my classroom window, I could watch this happen. They stash a nut or 2 or 3 in there and literally pack it in and leave. So in the fall, animals that stay active here in the winter, they are caching food like all over the forest, like hundreds of little tiny caches. One of my favorite food cache stories was, so I went to college in the mountains of North Carolina, and I worked at a little deli, and the deli was on a ski mountain. So we had, like people came and went skiing on this mountain. And so our building was half deli where I worked, and then the other half was renting ski equipment during the winter. And so one fall, someone asked me if I would help them kind of get this ski gear ready for the season. So I go in, and there was a huge closet, like half the size of my classroom, and I open it up, and it's just shelves from floor to ceiling, shelves with ski boots and snowboarding boots, just boots that we normally rent out. So I was supposed to go through and check them and kind of inventory, whatever. So I get to kind of like the back corner up, like higher than my head even. And I see the weirdest thing. I can't imagine what it is. So I turn on the light and I walk over, and there were, I don't know, a number of ski boots that were just overflowing with acorns. So a squirrel, we ended up figuring out that a squirrel had broken into the storage closet all fall. No one had been in there for weeks, months, and was caching all these acorns. I mean, hundreds of acorns in these boots, just overflowing. It was precious. So just a kind of a real life example of how these animals actually do try to cache and store food. Some animals actually start to grow in thicker coats, like we already mentioned, similar to like my dog does for sure. Oftentimes their thicker coat also comes with kind of what we call an undercoat. Like my dog's a golden retriever, and he has a different winter coat. It's like kind of fuzzy and goofy. That's his undercoat that kind of grows in for the winter, and then he'll lose it in the spring. And then some animals actually grow their winter coat with specialized hollow hairs. So this is a cross section of a hollow hair, and you can see it's literally hollow. So these are all air pockets that you can see, and structurally that's the same as putting on like a big down coat, right? Oh, that's a deer hair. I forgot to specify that that's from a deer. So essentially you can imagine just putting like a big layer of insulated air is like a big down coat. Oh my gosh, this is so cool. Some species actually have what we call a sublingual pouch in their mouth to provide storage for seeds for transport and helping in the caching process. So these birds, not all birds have this, but some birds, they have a sublingual pouch. You can see in the diagram here on the bottom left, it's like literally a pouch. And so when in the fall, or honestly even winter, if they find a good stash, they can fill their pouch with seeds while if they got a hot spot, they can fill their little pouch with seeds, fill it, and then fly away and stash it. Or if it's winter season, they literally might stash it somewhere and eat it that same day. For in the winter, you guys, on days like today when it's like 20 degrees right now, it's cold, these guys are living day by day. I mean, hour by hour, right? They're constantly trying to eat. Every hour is survival mode. Here's a picture. You can see a picture on the bottom here. The Clark's nutcracker is kind of famous because he has a huge sublingual pouch and it can hold like more than 60 seeds at a time. And you can see this X-ray view of this guy. It's pretty amazing. So if you imagine that in the fall, all these animals in the forest are just scurrying about, getting nuts and caching them, right? Pine cones, nuts, anything edible, they're trying to gather and cache throughout the forest. They don't want to put them all in one big, huge pile, right? Because if another critter finds them, they're gone. So it's actually pretty skillful and smart of them to put little caches all over the forest. I also read a study once that was, I wondered how the heck do they find them? Do they remember their little caches? And really what the scientists found was that it's totally smell. They do not have a memory of where they stash all this food in the forest. They just smell. Anyways, so then the question is, if you imagine now today, a cold winter day, out in the forest, there's all these caches, right? These nuts, these pine cones. Yes, a lot of them, like most of them, will get eaten by one critter or another. But imagine those little acorns that were tucked into the ground, patted, and not eaten or found. What's going to happen to that little acorn, for example? They're going to grow in the spring here, in possibly to a beautiful oak tree, right? So this is one example of how the forest depends on seed dispersal, right? So it's really important that these critters disperse these seeds throughout the forest. The plants actually depend on that seed dispersal. Okay, so let's talk about birds. Sorry, I have a timer going. I'm gonna try to check it. Okay, let's talk about birds. So yes, we know that lots of birds migrate. By now we've talked about some examples of migration and the birds that migrate. So about 2/3 of the birds migrate to somewhere else for the winter. But that means that about 1/3 of them actually stay, right? So a lot of birds are out here active even in an Ohio winter day. So what do they possibly do? One technique is that they fluff out their feathers and to create a thick layer of air, similar to what we saw with like the deer hair, like wearing a big winter coat. And you can tell if they've done this. I mean, you can look at birds outside your window and they look kind of funny. Here's a blue jay that looks if you've ever seen a regular blue jay, you can tell that his feathers are kind of fluffed and kind of looks goofy or something. He has fluffed his feathers on purpose in order to just create a larger insulating area. Some birds have a variety of types of feathers, and some of them are specific for warmth. So down is one example of a specific type of feather that kind of grows in. Now, down grows on like chickens, right? That's where we get our down coats, comes from chicken feathers. But You know, songbirds that we see in our backyard today, they also will kind of grow in an extra little layer of feathers. A lot of them will huddle, like literally huddle together to reduce heat. It's amazing how much heat can be retained by a huddle. When I used to teach outside in Minnesota in the dead of winter, to teach the kind of the science behind huddling, I had like an old-fashioned thermometer. And remember, I taught mostly middle schoolers, and I had a group of like 15 most of the time. So we'd go out on a 0-degree day, and I would take the thermometer and it would show 0. And we'd huddle together, and I'd hold my thermometer right by me and make them surround me. And I'd tell them a silly story or something. And we would just watch the temperature just, I mean, like physically go up, 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 up. So huddle, a lot of organisms will huddle to survive the winter as well. They're going to find shelter in tree cavities. Some of them will even burrow in the deep snow. Again, here, probably not many birds rely on that, but there are specific species like in Minnesota that use the snowpack as their home, their winter home. They're going to stash, again, food pretty much anywhere where they can, but also where they sleep. So if they have a particular, you know, like one tree cavity, they'll also kind of stash food in there so that throughout the evenings when it's freezing cold out, they also have food available for them. Snowshoe hares oftentimes comes up because they're kind of famous for their big, huge feet. And they also, you may have heard, but they do physically change their color from one season to another. So snowshoe hares lose the melanin pigment in their fur, which provides more open space. So it creates hollow furs and creates better camouflage. So this snowshoe hare on the top right here, this is a snowshoe hare in the spring and summer. And honestly, when I lived in Minnesota, where they don't live here, but they are in Minnesota. I mean, I honestly couldn't really tell a hare from a rabbit, right? They look very similar until the winter. So this snowshoe hare in the top right, this is a snowshoe hare in the spring and summer, just brown. What we see change in the fall, their hormones are triggered by colder temperatures, changing in daylight hours, and they actually grow a totally different coat. And like I said, it's white, as you can see with the snowshoe hare on the left. So we think that, yes, it definitely helps in camouflage, right? But also those individual hairs are hollow, which also helps in insulation. So because it's lost the pigment filling up that hair follicle, it's full of air and then more insulative. So scientists can't figure out kind of like, is it, you know, like which happened first? Was it they turned white to be camouflage or hollow furs to be more insulative? And then of course their feet. So they have big feet in comparison to their body and other organisms, but also their feet are, they have like tons of extra fur in order to help with even increase the size, which then distributes the weight of their body. So they are really good at walking on snow without falling down into the snow. So hence the bottom right picture here are snowshoes, which I have hiked many, many miles in snowshoes. And the whole point here is that that big shoe you're walking on just, again, disperses the weight of your body and allows it to be much easier to walk on a layer of snow. So white-tailed deer, we see them very active here in Ohio winter, but they do have some really cool adaptations to allow them to be more successful in the winter. So they also grow thicker coats. They grow darker, hollow hairs that allow them to absorb more heat from the sun, actually. So they go that route, but hollow hairs, like we saw with the cross section of that hair. They gain extra layers of fat. So they put on as much fat as possible in the fall. They have these oil producing glands, and then in the wintertime, they kind of go in, They secrete more oils in order to create a more waterproof covering against snow and cold rains and stuff. They do also, even though they stay here, they do overall greatly reduce their level of activity, especially on like really cold, windy, snowy days. So they can become, you know, half as active as normal, which helps them save energy, obviously, and requires them to eat less food. They'll typically find a more sheltered area with a lot of times within, you know, pine trees, because they still have the needles and they're protective of the wind. And they'll stay put for days at a time. And so if you go hiking, I have found many what we call a deer yard. And even though because of me, you know, as a hiker, I scared them away and they're gone. But you can see a deer yard. There's just deer poop everywhere, kind of like the bottom picture on the bottom left. There's deer poop everywhere, tracks everywhere, deer fur everywhere. So you can tell that this is kind of where they're hunkering down. They survive the winter. They'll eat a diet of twigs, stems, grasses, even lichens. They'll kind of scratch lichens off the bark of the trees. Again, just some more examples of huddling. So organisms that huddle in order to stay active. Oh boy. Okay, I'm going to keep going here. So delayed implantation is a really cool example. So this is what we call an internal pause button that delays the fertilized egg from implanting into the uterus. So listen to this. There's about 100 animals that have the ability to delay implantation until more ideal circumstances are met. Examples of this are skunks, bears, otters, shrews, minks. So what happens is, you guys, during active periods of time, like in the fall, for example, these animals will mate, okay? And the female has an egg that becomes fertilized. But what happens is the female retains the fertilized eggs for months, depending on the organism, the time period, until the internal or external factors improve, such as the weather conditions, and then their body is triggered actually to let that fertilized egg implant into the uterus, and then proceed through, you know, like a normal gestation period. So pretty amazing that these organisms have adapted to mate when they're active, keep the egg until time is right, and then the egg will implant, they go through gestation, they have their babies in warmer temperatures, and when food is more available. This is something students always ask about. So there's Berkman's rule, which shows that populations and species of a larger size are found in colder climates, and species of smaller sizes are found in warmer. And this just goes to show, like, if you compare different species of penguins, for example, the larger penguins tend to be in colder climates, and then the smaller penguins tend to be in warmer climates. Same goes with even like the same species of coyotes here on the top left. Even just from one location to another, even though they're the same species, they're, you know, genetically they have adapted to either be a larger organism in colder temperatures or smaller in warmer. Allen's rule states that animals in colder climates usually have shorter limbs or appendages than the equivalent animals from warmer climates. So they have shorter appendages to, you know, reduce the risk of, oh my gosh, what's it called? You know what I mean. When the frostbite, sorry, to reduce the risk of frostbite. Countercurrent heat exchange really explains how, like, the ducks that I ran by the other morning are still just trotting along in the Lincoln Park pond, and their feet are just fine. Picture those ducks. I mean, there's like almost ice covering the entire pond, and those little ducks are just tootling around like normal with those tiny little legs, skinny little legs, and skinny little feet. So what we see with countercurrent heat exchange is that as warm blood leaves the body, so imagine in the body we have warm blood. These are warm-blooded animals. Most often this is what we'll see with like ducks. So warm blood leaves the body out into the appendages, And heat then diffuses along the way to the cold blood that is returning. So what we see is like blood vessels really close together like this. One is coming straight from the body, very warm, and then coming back to the body is really cold blood that just left the duck's foot, for example. And so we see the heat diffusing from the blood coming from the body and actually helping to warm up the blood before it gets back to the main body. This type of counter heat exchange is common in lots of different animals. We see this in birds' feet, like I said, dolphins' fins. So some dolphin species live in really cold waters. Different whale tongues, right? So we see this in whale tongues that live in really cold waters. Tuna fish, great white sharks, beaver tails. So there's a slew of places where we see this coming into play. Sorry. And lastly, I want to talk just briefly about shivering. Shivering is is like one technique of winter survival. Some organisms shiver sporadically as they need to throughout the day. Some organisms will shiver for longer periods of time. But it's basically just muscle contraction in order to produce heat, right? So it's kind of cute to think of organisms out there literally shivering just in order to create some body heat. I'm gonna check my clock again. Okay. I think maybe we'll stop there for today. All right, thanks guys.